Who's that coming down the track? It's our friend Jon Smith from Speakeasy Sports, the Georgia Bulldogs. The more things change, John, the more they stay the same. The Dogs are back in Atlanta at Mercedes-Benz in the SEC Championship, where they will take on Steve Sarkisian and the Texas Longhorns, a rematch of this game from earlier this season in mid-October. Again, I'm joined by Jon Smith, Speakeasy Sports. Those guys do a great job talking all things SEC, college football, sports, and really everything that's not sports, everything you can think of. John, appreciate you taking the time, man. It's a pleasure to finally get you on the airwaves, my friend.
Man, thanks for having me. Chris, I feel like we have become fast friends this year through tailgate in Tuscaloosa, tailgate in Athens for Tennessee, your SEC Unfiltered tour, just bringing people together. I'm glad I finally got on the show. Thanks for having me. Excited to talk some ball today.
Yeah, John, like you said, Morris Hall, man, it runs deep. Obviously, I was with you in Athens, that game against Tennessee just a few weeks ago at the Morris Hall tailgate. So shout out to the fine folks of the Morris Hall tailgate, who I know will be in Atlanta this weekend, raising hell and, having a good time there in the ATL. But anyways, John, speaking on Georgia, again, you finish out the season 10-2, 6-2 in conference. I got to get your thoughts, though, John. You were at this game, that Georgia Tech game. 8 overtimes. I saw the pictures. You were there in person. Have you ever witnessed a football game like that? Obviously, Georgia, they already had the SEC championship appearance locked up, but I mean, rivalry weekend, obviously it means a ton. I think most thought the Dogs were just going to kind of roll in that one, and the thriller we got, nobody could have saw coming. But again, you were there in person.
Yep.
I have to imagine your heart rate skyrocketed that night.
Yeah, for sure. Luckily, so I was there with my brother, who is a paramedic. So the I think the benefit of having, if you have a family member that's a medical professional, go to Georgia football games with that family member. So I was okay.
He's got a great mustache too. Got a great mustache too.
He does.
Like
yeah, he
the
has
best.
a mustache.
The best.
Yeah, shout out Daniel. But we had a great time. Once Georgia finally showed up to the football game. I will say, you said people thought Georgia was just going to come in there and run away with that one. I think Kirby Smart, he would never admit this, but I think Kirby Smart thought Georgia was going to come in there and run away with it. If you saw that Georgia posted some victory highlights and they have clips of like the pregame and him saying it, and he says in the pregame, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. We're not stopping, which sounds like he's telling his team, we're coming out here to run this thing up on Georgia Tech. And dude, to be down 17-0 at halftime, to have Georgia shut out in the first half for the first time since 2019, to have a 30-game home win streak on the line against Georgia Tech, I think Georgia fans were in a totally different space. We were like, what in the world is happening? And I will give Georgia fans some credit. So I know that they're people were saying, a lot of Georgia fans were leaving. There were some Georgia fans that were filing out when Haynes King scored to go up 27-13 for Georgia Tech to go up 27-13 late in the fourth quarter. There were some Georgia fans that were leaving. Most of the Georgia fans that I saw that we were there with just got louder. Like this crowd absolutely got louder. And then, it was 27 degrees. And I think the wind chill was probably down to like 22 or 21, freezing in that stadium. But the fans stayed packed in there and Georgia pulled it out. And what I will say is that speaks to who this Georgia football team is this year. This is not the best Georgia football team under Kirby Smart by a mile. This is not a Georgia team that you're going to roll the ball out there and like, look out, you're about to get frog stomped. It's not that team. What it is it's a team that absolutely, they're a slow starting team, especially on offense. They're a team that like, you don't know always what you're going to get, but this team never gives up. This team they were tied 17-all versus Tennessee, just got better. This team has every year, even in the loss to Alabama, the loss to Ole Miss, we can talk about that one. That was a little bit different, but this team has gotten better in the second half of games all year. They're very resilient. And I think that speaks to a lot of what Kirby's doing. I don't think Kirby Smart, everybody looks at Georgia 10-2 and kind of stumbling their way into the SEC championship. And I look at it as Kirby Smart's done one of his best jobs coaching. If you look at based off of depth, based off the way that players have executed, Georgia leads maybe the entire country now in drops by wide receivers. Like, it's just wild that Georgia is even in this place.
John, one thing I want to highlight that I think is going under the radar going in this game against Texas is the play of Carson Beck over the last few weeks, and it started when I was in Athens against Tennessee, and I actually saw the play, John, just before you and I jumped on here this morning. The play that it seemed like changed Carson Beck's fortunes. Dogs are down 10-0. He scrambles, gets the big first down, takes a lick, gets up, does the whole celebration, and it's like from then on, he's thrown for just less than 1,000 yards, 11 touchdowns, and no interceptions in his last 3 games. What have you seen from Carson Beck, the switch that has essentially flipped? Because, again, John, 3-4 weeks ago, we were talking about Carson Beck, and at least I was, as a liability for the Georgia offense. Now it seems like he's hit his stride, and he's turned back into the Carson Beck we all expected to see.
Yeah, this is the Carson Beck we saw last year, right? Like, if you look at Carson Beck last year, the dude – he was never the guy that was going to come out and wow you in terms of, he's not, I mean, everybody uses, I don't know, Patrick Mahomes, but, Jalen Milroe's legs, like a lot of these guys, Carson Beck is not that kind of an athlete. But what he has been, what he was all last year was absolutely consistent. He was a guy who he's going to make reads very quickly. He's going to find, the open receiver. He's going to make good decisions. He's going to do all those things. That's what he was last year. And that's what he's become in these last 3 weeks. And I think you're right. That hit versus Tennessee, we were there, and my brother, who you mentioned earlier, that's what he said. He said, dude, he got his bell rung and it just shook whatever cobwebs were in there, just shook them all loose. Because he did become that guy again. And what he's done is he reads defenses quickly. He makes good decisions. He makes good throws, and he has started using his legs a little bit more the last 3 weeks. Tennessee was that example where, he had that scramble, but you saw that versus Georgia Tech a little bit too, where he got in situations where he needed to, get out of the pocket. He needed to move around a little bit, and he's moved around. And I think that's helped him a lot. The biggest thing with Georgia, again, I'll say this, is if you look even at Texas, when he threw 3 interceptions, one of those interceptions hit Lawson Lucky right in the hands and would have put Georgia first and goal on the 8-yard line. And instead it was an interception. Like, Carson Beck is finally getting, even though Georgia fans, close your ears because you're going to come at me for this because Arian Smith dropping the ball. But he's finally getting some help from his receivers. Like, you're not having as many of those like catastrophic drops as you've had earlier in the season as well. But yeah, I think Carson Beck is he's not peaking, but I think he's getting better at the right time, and maybe he can pull it all together versus Texas and play that one of those games like we saw Carson Beck play last year.
John, 563 total yards is what Georgia allowed to Georgia Tech. Haynes King was phenomenal. I'll ask you simply, what is your concern level for the Georgia defense right now? Do you look at that game as more of a one-off and just Haynes King kind of played Superman, or are there things going in this Texas game that you're really concerned about when it comes to Kirby Smart's defense?
Is there, like, when you said what's your level of concern, what's the scale? Is it a 1 to 10 scale?
Yeah, I guess 1 to 10. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Okay, so it's an 11. Whatever the scale is of
panic.
concern, I'm above. Yes, I'm pure panic. No, not only because, so you said Georgia allowed 260 yards rushing versus Georgia Tech. They allowed 226 yards rushing versus UMass, 146 yards rushing versus Tennessee. Like, this Georgia defense, there's my buddy Dog Stats on Twitter. Shout out Josh. He puts out this metrics of the CFP rankings with all of the stats and metrics. And so I'm using his chart, but Georgia, the defensive yards per play is 3rd of all teams in the top 12, 3rd most. And it's only behind Miami and Boise State. And so you have Boise State, the worst, most yards per play, Miami, the 2nd yards per play, Georgia, the 3rd yards per play allowed by the defense, 3rd most. And that's panic, man, because, like, you play teams like Texas that Georgia's about to play right now. You get into the playoffs, you're probably playing, maybe a team like Ohio State, maybe even maybe a team like Indiana and Kurt Cignetti's offense. Like, Georgia is allowing a lot of rush yards, and they're allowing a lot of rush yards to teams that haven't been good running the football all year. And so that's the concern that I have for Georgia's defense. Now, Kirby Smart will tell you, which I love this stat, and Georgia fans, you need to hear me now that I just said I'm in full panic mode and the defense sucks. Kirby Smart said versus Georgia Tech that they had Georgia Tech in 16 second and longs. So second and long is second and 7 yards plus. Georgia had Georgia Tech 16 second and longs. And he said the issue was we didn't execute on second and long. We gave up like a number of good plays on second and long, gave up a number of third down plays. But Georgia is getting the Georgia defense is they're getting offenses in situations where Kirby Smart said, if you had told me we had 16 second longs, I would have said we did something really right on defense. And he said, well, we didn't do really right is on second down. And so I think that's the thing is, can Georgia pull this together? Because they're really good on first down, and then something, the wheels seem to fall off after that. So if Georgia can pull it together on second down, especially second long versus Texas, they'll be fine. I think I think Kristen Miller, hopefully he's healthy on that defensive line. Georgia's defensive front has been banged up a little bit. They just need some help. They need some better rotations, but it's concern, man. It's not, you don't sit through 8 overtimes in 20-degree weather versus Georgia Tech and watch them give up 260 yards rushing and come out and be like, oh, yeah, they're going to be fine. No, there's concern for sure.
So, John, turning the attention to the SEC championship, and the old adage goes, it's hard to beat a team twice. Obviously, the Dogs went into Austin earlier this year, and offensively, it certainly was not a perfect performance, but Georgia all but dominated. Was up 23-0 at halftime. Won that game 30-15. Again, you win a game by 2 scores where your quarterback throws 3 interceptions, and Carson Beck had one of his more poor performances of the season. How much do you buy into that? It's hard to beat a team twice, because obviously that's applying to Georgia here. They'll look to go 2-0 against Texas, and again win the big one in Atlanta. When you look back at that first matchup and then compare it to the SEC title, what do you think Georgia can take away and do what they did in that first game? And then what you've seen from Texas, John, what adjustments do you think they'll have to make? Because, again, Texas and Georgia obviously are somewhat different teams from when they met back in mid-October.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is hard to beat a team twice. I mean, ask Auburn in 2017 when they beat Georgia 40-17 and turned around and lost in the SEC championship game 3 weeks later to Georgia. Ask Alabama in 2021 when they blew Georgia's doors off and then turned around and lost in the national championship game to Georgia just a couple months later. So it's hard to beat a team twice. I think a number of reasons for that. But I think mostly the reason is because the SEC, you talk about it all week, all day long, 24/7 on this network. The SEC is, you have the best of the best coaches, the best of the best players. Anybody can beat anybody on any given week. And so when you have the opportunity to get another shot at somebody, and you have that kind of talent and you have that kind of coaching mindset, it's very difficult to beat a team twice because of that. Now, what I think I've seen from Texas is their defense has gotten significantly better week by week. Georgia, rushed for 230 yards. Trevor Etienne had a little bit of a coming out party for Georgia versus Texas back in October. Trevor Etienne is banged up now. He's likely not going to play in this SEC championship game. Georgia's going to be down to true freshman Nate Frazier, but also you have Roderick Robinson, who just got his first snaps of the year versus Georgia Tech last week, and Roderick Robinson is about 6'1", 240 pounds. So Georgia's going to have a little bit of that kind of thunder and lightning kind of combo out of the backfield. But Texas defense has gotten better and better by week. Texas defense is especially better, in my opinion, that front seven of getting pressure on the quarterback, of managing. They haven't really shut down kind of the run games, but they've done a good job of like managing the rush games. I mean, I guess they did versus Kentucky, but kind of everybody does. But they've been very good at making teams kind of one-dimensional the last few weeks. And I think Georgia has been such a pass-heavy team that we'll see, can Georgia get any semblance of a run game? So when I look at this, I think it's going to come down to really three things. One, can Texas defensive front play like they've played against Arkansas, Kentucky, Texas A&M? Can Georgia, if they can't run the ball, can they find some semblance of a pass game? And Carson Beck making good decisions and get off to a fast start. And then number three, I think it's really going to come down to what it always comes down to in these games, Chris. Who wins the one-on-ones? Who wins the one-on-ones? You got to win more one-on-ones. That's offensive line on defensive line. That's wide receiver on cornerback. And I think these teams match up pretty well. So Texas, their defense is getting better. I think their offense, I think it's about the same, to be honest. I don't want to downplay Quinn Ewers. Quinn Ewers hasn't been that guy for me. He's played very good football, but he hasn't been the guy for me. And so we'll see what he can do this weekend.
John, switching gears just a little bit, because you and I were talking off air just before we hit record here. The ticket prices are dropping for the SEC title. I've seen some folks out there pushing narratives that, listen, both of these teams are in the college football playoff no matter what, which it's actually kind of funny you say that. And I think Georgia fans have such PTSD from last year that I think a lot of Dogs fans are like, they need to win to make sure they're in because of what happened in 2023. But in all seriousness, both teams probably in. You're going to have some people this week try to write it off as, does the SEC championship still have as much juice? Does it really mean as much anymore? John, can you talk about, from a Georgia fan perspective for the Georgia program, what winning an SEC title means? Because I know, again, when I was in Athens a few weeks ago talking to a good buddy of mine that was on staff at Georgia a few years ago, and he would mention like the 2021 season, they win the national title, and Kirby Smart, his first thought is how pissed off he was because they should have had another ring. He was pissed off about losing the SEC title. Kirby's an SEC guy. He knows what this game means. I just feel like there's a bad narrative out there that, for whatever reason, this game isn't as important as it once was. And I just feel like it. I know from the Texas side, first ever one, they want to win it. From the Georgia side, shed some light. It's a very, very big deal for the Dogs to win the SEC.
Yeah, I mean, Georgia's played for an SEC championship in 3 of the last 7 seasons, and Georgia's won 2. I'm sorry, not in 3. I'm sorry, they played in 6 of the last 7 seasons. 2020 was the lone year. So 2017, 2018, 2019, 2021, 2022, and 2023. 6 times, and Georgia's won 2. I think this game is incredibly important to Kirby Smart. And people can say what they want about, like you said, you're already in the playoff. I do think that matters in terms of how, Kirby and Sark as well manage the game, because you certainly, you don't want to unload the clip to win this game and then lose, not be healthy, lose the next one. I get all that. But if you think this game is not important to Kirby Smart, a guy who played at Georgia, a guy who lives and breathes SEC, he said it before. You can find the clip. Kirby Smart says, "I was born and raised in the SEC." Like, this is, it is. It's not only important for that reason, but it's also, if you're a coach at this level and a competitor at this level, and there's a championship on the line, and you telling me like, nah, it's all right, we're playing for something bigger. What's bigger than a championship? Like, I understand a national championship is bigger, but like, you're telling me that trophy, that SEC championship trophy, and you're also telling me, and the bigger reason I think Georgia fans, what it means to us, is Texas is the newcomer. Texas is the new guy on the street. Texas, and we're going to let them come in year one and win this whole thing, especially after we beat them by 2 touchdowns 2 months ago. Like, you're telling me that's what's going to happen just because, like, we care more about a game down the road? No, I call bullshit on that, man. I think this game is super important to Georgia fans, to Kirby Smart. I think it's super important to Steve Sarkisian for similar reasons. Like, Texas has something to prove. And more importantly, and the thing that, not a lot of people want to talk about, but recruiting. Like, I mean, you talk about all eyes on Atlanta. You talk about and the ability to win this game, to beat Texas twice if you're Georgia, to turn around and prove that you can beat Georgia if you're Texas, goes such a long way to all these kids that are lining up to come play in these programs. So it's a huge game. I understand people, college football playoff implications and all that stuff. I don't think any of that matters on Saturday when they line it up. I just don't. I think when they're between the lines, nobody's thinking about, well, don't worry, if we lose this, we still get a home game in the playoff. No, especially these guys. It's like, I'll say this last thing, and I don't mean to rant too long on this, but the college football playoff, they really screwed teams that make a conference championship game, because like, if you make the conference championship game, the other teams that are in the college football playoff already, they get a bye this week, and then they play their first round. If you lose this game, not only did you miss a bye this week, then you miss the bye, and you got to play in the first round. So if you're going to show up and play this game, you might as well win it and get that bye, than end up, being like, well, we just played an extra game for nothing. So,
yeah, I think to your point, John, these two teams are the teams that get here. They get here because they go one speed, and they will not change that speed in this game. They're only going to kick it into that next gear. John, I know you mentioned this earlier. I'll ask you again. Key or keys to the game for Georgia if they're going to take down Texas, win the SEC championship? You mentioned a few earlier, but I'll let you do it again. What does Georgia have to do to take down Texas for a second time this year?
Georgia's got to have a fast start on offense, got to protect the ball and not turn it over. Georgia's got to limit explosive plays on defense, get Texas into second and long, and actually show up on defense in second and long. If Georgia does those things, this will be a similar experience for Texas in October. If Georgia does one of those two things, I think Georgia wins the football game. If Georgia does neither of those, I think Texas is going to run away with it.
Jon Smith, Speakeasy Sports. John, let folks know where to find you, check out your work, and just plug Speakeasy Sports for a moment. So they can go over there and check you guys out.
Yeah, man, you can find us Speakeasy Sports at Speak Sports HQ on Twitter and Instagram, on YouTube at Speakeasy Sports. We do a show 3 times a week where we talk college sports and high spirits. So we talk college football, college basketball, college baseball. So come check us out there. You can find me on Twitter at John Tweets Sports. Really glad to be on. Love what SEC Unfiltered is doing. You got a great crew over there with Dave and Cole, even though he's wearing that Tennessee orange when he came to Athens, whatever. But you got a good crew over there. Really enjoy the work that you guys put out. So thanks for having us on.
John, you're the man. Appreciate you taking the time. We'll definitely do it again soon. And maybe, just maybe, I'll see you in Atlanta this weekend.
We'll see, brother. We'll let the fans know by the picture on the timeline. So you got to go follow.
You're the man.